In this video we're going to explore how you can use P5 Archive in conjunction with Backblaze B2 cloud storage and the Backblaze Fireball device. Let's assume that on our P5 installation over here we have some storage that we wish to archive, and there's far too much data here for us to archive directly to the B2 bucket over our internet connection in any reasonable time. So what you can do is, via your Backblaze login, you can request a Fireball device which looks like this and gets shipped to you via your courier service. Once you've received this, you can connect it to your LAN and you can copy data to it at LAN speeds nice and quickly. Once you've done that, you will have the device picked up by Backblaze. It will go back to the data center and the contents of that Fireball will be copied into the B2 bucket that you've specified, and from there P5 can continue to access it, as we'll explore in more detail in the rest of this video. We will break it down into these sections. So number one, we will begin with how to go about requesting and getting hold of a Backblaze Fireball device. Once you've received it, how to connect that device onto your local area network and how to configure the SMB share so that you can mount that on the Mac. Once that's done, we will take the SMB share, take Archiware P5 Archive, and we will create an archive workflow and archive some data onto the Fireball. Then once we've finished doing that, we will detach the Fireball storage in P5, and then we can switch off the Fireball, box it back up, send it to Backblaze, and then wait for them to tell us that the data is available in the B2 bucket. Once it is, we will do the attaching of the storage to the B2 bucket in P5, and then I'll show you restoring some test data from the bucket so that you can see that everything is working. So our first step is to have a Backblaze account. Visit your account, sign in, visit the My Account section within the Backblaze site. In here you can see some buckets which we've already created. You'll need to create a bucket that's going to receive the contents of the Fireball later on. And then to order the Fireball, simply click on Fireball on the left hand side here, where you can see the details and the current price of obtaining one. And then once you click on Order a Fireball, you will choose the name of the bucket you wish to use to receive the data from the Fireball once it's been returned back to Backblaze. We did this, and the Fireball arrived. Okay, so we have our Backblaze on the table, powered up and connected to our Ethernet network. So the next step will be to sign into our Backblaze B2 account to recover the needed credentials to access the device itself. So we point our browser at backblaze.com and then we log into our Backblaze account. And once we're signed in, we go to the Fireball link on the left hand side. And this will show us the details of the Fireball that we have. So you can see it has 70 terabytes of capacity, and this I button here will bring up a pane of information including various credentials needed to access this Fireball, some of which I've grayed out here. So in order to pull up the web interface for the Fireball, we open another tab in our browser and we go to find.synology.com, which will search the local network for Synology devices. And there's our Synology. So it displays the IP, and we can use the connect button to pull up the web interface for the Synology. The Fireball's username is always going to be Backblaze, and the password can be looked up by referring back in the other tab to that panel of information. And it's the password displayed at the bottom that we need. So we enter that into the UI, and then we get to the probably familiar Synology user interface. The Synology has a volume already set up, but it's encrypted using an encryption key that's only available from your B2 login. So meaning that if anybody got hold of the device in transit, they wouldn't be able to get your data from it. So the next step is to decrypt the volume and then make sure that we can mount it from this Mac that we're looking at so that we can start writing data to it. So we visit the control panel in the Synology, go to the shared folder section, and then data for B2 is the volume that we're going to decrypt. So you go to the encryption menu at the top, click on mount, and then enter the encryption key that we had in the other tab, paste that in there, and then that will decrypt the volume for you. At this point we'll then be able to go mount the volume via SMB from a client machine, in this case this Mac desktop that you're looking at. So to do that, we visit the Go menu in the Finder, choose Connect to Server, and then put in the SMB : / with the IP address of the Synology and connect. And then we will use the username Backblaze and that password again that we can copy paste out of the panel in the Backblaze login in the other tab here. So that goes in and we connect, and if all goes well you'll see the data for B2 Share mounted on the Mac desktop, and if we double click we'll see that there's 70 terabytes of free space ready for our archive data. And I'll just do a quick test to make sure that I have read and write access to it by creating an empty folder. So now we have everything that we need to begin archiving using P5 to this Synology via this data for B2 Share. So what we'll do now is open a new tab and point ourselves at localhost :8000. That's the IP port where P5 running locally is presenting its web admin interface, and then we log in using default credentials and we get to the Archiware P5 web interface. So this is a fresh installation of P5. All I've done is entered an evaluation license so that we can actually use it. So I'll run through all the configuration steps now needed to archive to the Backblaze Fireball. So to begin with, we visit the Archive tab at the top, and then in order to configure storage, we go to the Storage Manager on the left-hand edge, and then to New Disk Storage at the bottom. Now the volumes directory needs to point to that mounted data for B2. On a Mac that will appear under volumes, and then the folder data for B2 is the one that we select. This will allow us to write data into that share, and I'm going to configure this to use all the available free space, so that's 70 terabytes, and we will configure this and label volumes for a default archive pool. This will cause P5 to create a number of virtual tape volumes on the Synology into which our data will be written. Apply this window and Archiware will now prepare these virtual tape volumes for use, which will take a few moments. If we now look on the data for B2 Share, we'll see these volumes being created. There's 13, 14 and so on. And also we can view this running job within the P5 web interface by, back in the browser window, going to the job monitor window, which will show us this running labeling job and allow us to see when the job has completed. Each of these virtual tapes is 1 terabyte in size by default, so we'll create enough to use the available free space on the Fireball. The labeling job is now finished, so we can close the job monitor window and head back to the Finder, where we'll see numerous virtual tape volumes existing as individual folders. Those volumes have been labeled into a pool called Default Disk Archive Pool, which now has a capacity of 62 terabytes, and within that we have 62 1 terabyte volumes which are listed here. As you can see, each of them has 0 bytes on it so far. And our final step in configuring the storage is to stop P5 compressing data that it's writing to the Fireball, and we do that here. So we have 2 virtual tape drives attached to this storage device, and for each of those two under standalone tape drive on the left, we will go into the additional options tab and set data compression to no. In our tests, we have identified that this increases the throughput to the Fireball, and quite often media data is being archived, which doesn't benefit further from compression. The final step before we can actually start archiving is to create an archive plan, which we do here under Archive Plan, and then clicking New at the bottom. So an archive plan is a configuration that determines how some archiving takes place. We begin by providing a description for this archive plan, so I'll call this Backblaze B2 Archiver and apply to save it. The target storage is already configured to use Disk Archive, which is the storage that we've already configured, and we'll stick with the default archive index, which will track everything that's been archived in a local database within this P5 installation. It's possible to have a hot folder which will automatically archive a particular location according to a schedule that you define at the bottom there. We won't do that today. We're going to manually choose some of the data to archive from the desktop there, but I will configure some previews. So previews will create still image previews or small proxy video previews from the footage that we're archiving, and that will remain viewable within the index even when the original files are offline. To do that, we click on the New button within Previews, and we will add a preview generator that uses FFmpeg, and we'll go with the defaults. It'll generate previews for all of these file extensions. And we'll also add a preview generator using ImageMagick for still images that will apply to these file extensions, and we'll apply that one as well. Those two preview generators require that you have the FFmpeg and the ImageMagick tools already installed on the Mac. Finally, the metadata tab up at the top allows you to define scripts to ingest metadata from within the media files that you're archiving, so that that metadata will also be searchable within the index even when the assets are offline. For the purposes of this demo though, today I'm not going to configure any metadata ingestion. So with the archive plan configured, we can close this window and now visit the manual archiving section on the left hand side, which will let us browse some live file systems to archive from. This folder over here on the desktop called Data for Archive has some movie files and image files in it. So this is going to be the sample data that we will archive via the Fireball. There's 62 and a bit gigabytes in this folder. And back in the web interface, I can browse through the file system on the Mac through Users, My Home Directory. To the desktop, I can locate that same folder and add that to the archive selection. So this is a list of folders and files that we are going to archive. You can select additional files or browse to different folders and select files or folders to archive, add them to this kind of shopping basket window, and when you're ready to archive, you click the archive button, select the archive plan that we chose earlier, and simply click Start, followed by using the blue monitor button to pull up the live monitor window, which will tell us what's happening right now. So there's a little chevron you can click there to expand the detail, and you can see immediately that we are now writing already 0.5 gigabytes worth of data to the virtual tape volumes that reside on the Fireball storage, which we have mounted on this Mac via the SMB share. So now we just let this job run until it's written that 60 odd gigabytes of data. So let's wind forward a little bit. Here you can see we are generating clips. This is the process whereby we revisit all of the movie and image files that we've archived and generate those thumbnails from them so that we can see those files even though they're offline in the archive. And then winding forward again to where the job has finished, you can see it's sitting there at the bottom where the completed jobs are listed. 57 gigabytes have been archived to those virtual tape volumes on the Backblaze Fireball. and each of the files that we archived from the file system is now represented in the index database within P5 along with a preview of that file. So we'll be able to see the file name, the metadata about the file, and also a preview of the file. So to see what we've archived, we go to the Restore tab, and then under Archive and under the default archive index, we can browse what looks just like the file system. In our web browser, we can visit the path that we archive from, and then when we get to a folder that has some files in it, we can see a gallery view of those images in this folder. Let's just make that a little bit wider so we can see a few more. Of course, in this view you can make a selection of files that you might want to recover, which we'll cover later. And if we go up a folder and visit one of the folders with video files inside, we can double click on one of those. You can do this to any of the files in the index, and you can play back the little proxy video that we can create from videos that you're archiving. You can choose how long these videos are and the resolution and so on. If I click on the search button at the top, I can search across the entire index for something like name contains archive, and you can see P5 immediately comes back with a bunch of matching files whose file name contains the word archive. So at this point you could continue to archive more data using P5 to the Fireball device until you have everything on there that you want, and then it's time to send the Fireball back to Backblaze and have the data copied into the cloud. So before we do that, we need to go through a little process in P5 whereby we detach the pool of data from the Fireball so that P5 is no longer dependent on that SMB share to get to those volumes. And then later on, when the data is visible in the B2 bucket in Backblaze across the cloud, then we reattach it. So to do this, we visit the pools section on the left hand side, and then we can right click on the pool that we've been using, which has currently got volume stored on that data for B2 share, and we choose to detach it from this SMB share. So the one thing that we need to input in order to do this is the location of what we call a staging area, which is a local folder to P5 that it can use for caching purposes once the volumes are stored in the cloud. So this means that when you're archiving additional data, before uploading that data to the cloud storage, we will assemble that data using this folder, this staging area that you're specifying here. And when you're doing restores, we will also use this temporary storage to pull down chunks of data from the cloud before we reassemble that back into the files that you're restoring. In this window here, you'll see that the recommended size is 1/1000th of the total capacity of the archive storage. In version 6.1, this will be much reduced, so you won't need so much storage available in this staging area with version 6.1. So I'm going to specify a staging area just to be a folder on this desktop that we can see here. So I'll click the little ellipsis button next to the staging area field, and from here I can browse down through users, my user, desktop, and within P5 I can actually create that new folder. I'll call that B2 cache for P5, and then we select that folder and it will show up in the staging area field, and then we can click the detach button, which will then prepare us for being able to disconnect the Fireball and ship it back to Backblaze. So the job monitor will let us see, if we click on it, that there is a job which has run to detach the pool, which is completed successfully. So we are now finished with all that we need to do in the P5 interface. Before I power off the Synology, I will eject the share from the Mac, like so, and then I will visit the Backblaze UI again, and in here we just need to visit the control panel, and then under shared folder highlight the data for B2 share and unmount it, which will also re-encrypt it so that anybody having access to this unit will not have access to our data. And with that we can shut the Synology down, return it to its packaging and send it back to Backblaze. Okay, so here we are back on the Mac. The Europe 4 bucket, which you can see here, I'm currently logged into my Backblaze B2 account. This is the bucket where we now have our 62 gigabytes worth of data available in the cloud. And if I click on the upload download button here, you can see each of those volumes that we copied onto the Synology Fireball device now exists inside of this bucket. In fact, most of the data that we actually archived is just in that 10,001 volume. So let's open another tab in our browser, point it at the local P5 installation, log in, and once we're logged in, there's a couple of things we need to do. First of all, we need to configure P5 so that it knows about the B2 bucket where the data now resides. So to do that, under the Archive tab, we go to Cloud Service, we click on New Service, and we're going to add access to a Backblaze B2 bucket in here. And then to do this, there are 3 bits of information required. Each of these pieces of information is available to you by visiting the B2 login, going to the keys section, which is actually over here on the left hand side, app keys, and app keys will allow you to get hold of the credentials you need to access your bucket. So I'm going to fill these in. So those are the credentials, that's the bucket name, and I'm going to allow 2 parallel upload/download streams. This can increase the performance of the connection between you and the B2 bucket depending on the speed of your internet connection. So you have to really do a bit of experimenting here to see how many parallel uploads gives you the best speed. So I apply those settings. I can click the test connection button at this point, which will just validate that it can connect successfully, meaning that the credentials don't have any typos in them. So I apply that and close it, and the B2 connection now shows up in the list under my cloud services. Next, I will visit the storage pool, which is currently detached with a little red arrow against it. So the storage pool is currently not knowing where its data is. So in order to hook it back up, I can right-click, click on Attach rather than Detach, and all I need to do in this window is specify that the data is to be found in the Backblaze B2 configuration that we just created. So remember that we have this caching folder that we created in the previous detaching step on the desktop. That's still there. So I will now click on the Attach button, and if I click on Monitor, I can see this job running, and you'll see a couple of jobs will run, and what they'll do is they'll visit each of those volume folders in the cloud bucket, and they will download a small amount of metadata information down to this folder on the desktop, and it will do that for each of, I think there were 62 volumes in total, so it will do that for each of those 62 volumes. So it's going to take a couple of minutes. So let's just wind forward to the end of this job. Okay, so as you can see, those 2 jobs that reattach the pool to the B2 bucket completed successfully. So if we go back to the main window here and refresh the pool, you can see that the red cross has gone. It is now hooked back up to the cloud service. That doesn't mean that there's lots of data now stored in the cache folder. So if we have a look at the size of that, you can see there's pretty minimal amount, 11 megabytes in there at the moment. So what we can do now, just as a test, is we can restore something. So we'll go into our archive index, where we can browse the media files that we archived earlier. So I'll just browse down through the desktop to the data for archive folder, which you'll remember is the folder that we did the archiving from. Let's restore something fairly small. So if I just choose a few JPEG files, add those to my restore selection, click on restore, and let's restore to a different place. So let's go back to the desktop folder, make a folder called test restore, choose that folder, click on the next button, and now P5 will say, yep, there's 6 files here to restore, 58 megabytes in size, and it's that first of our virtual tape volumes which is currently online, as in it's accessible via the B2 bucket. So we can begin that job, and what will happen fairly quickly is some of the chunks of data stored in that bucket will be downloaded. So you can see the chunks are about 250 megabytes each in size, and I would imagine that those JPEG files probably, given that they're fairly small, they're probably all in the same chunk. So you can see that that chunk is downloading, almost halfway downloaded now. We're running this on a fairly not super fast internet connection, as you can see. Let's wind forward a little bit, and the restore has finished. So if we have a look in our test restore folder here, we can see those JPEG files that we've just recovered via the index, via the B2 bucket. And if we look again at the size of our cache folder, that hasn't changed. So those chunks would have been temporarily downloaded into the caching folder in order to reassemble the original files that we were restoring. But once the job's finished, that's tidied up, and those chunks of data that have been downloaded are deleted. And in the same way that we just restored, we could now continue to archive. So if I wanted to, I could go browse storage and choose more files to archive and add to the existing archive in B2. The only difference being that this time the archive data will be uploaded via my internet connection to that B2 bucket. So I think you can see from this video that it's pretty simple to have to utilize the Backblaze Fireball device to bootstrap the creation of a cloud archive and then have that sent back to the B2 storage to be uploaded into the bucket, and then easily hook up P5 to continue using that storage now that it's located back in the cloud. So yeah, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.